Hello and welcome to Mythic Mind Games, where we discuss video games through the lens of the Christian humanities. I'm Dr. Andrew Snyder, and I'm glad that you're here. Hey there, welcome back to the latest episode of Mythic Mind Games. Today I am joined by Jeremy Key and Master Samwise, both of whom have been on the main Mythic Mind podcast before, although it's been a little while. And we are here to discuss Red Dead Redemption 2. Just an incredible game, as I've talked about some in the last episode, really focusing specifically in on Arthur Morgan. Today we're going to have more of a broad-reaching conversation about what makes this game so great and a good why it provides good evidence for the argument that games can serve a role that's at the very least analogous to good literature. And if you enjoy this conversation and you want to see more of this happen on a regular basis, then you can head over to patreon.com/mythicmind to lend your support and also to get involved in these conversations, because patrons get open invitations to any of these chats we have on this podcast, the main Mythic Mind podcast, or Mythic Mind movies and shows. But for now, let's go ahead and get right into our conversation on Red Dead Redemption 2. Right. Hello, hello. Jeremy, I'm glad to see that you dressed for the occasion.
I'm underdressed.
No. See, I'm a Texan. We just dress like this naturally.
Man, I should have planned ahead on this.
What can you do?
Welcome to the latest episode of Mythic Mind Games, as we're going to continue our conversation on Red Dead Redemption 2. This time I'm joined by Jeremy Key and Master Samwise, both of whom have been on the main podcast before, although it's been a little while, especially for Jeremy. And so I think it'd be helpful just to start off, quick review, brief introduction, whatever you want to say about yourself, whatever you want to plug. Jeremy, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Jeremy, Jeremy Key. I don't actually know what my Twitter handle is, but I would plug that if I knew what it was. But I'm on Twitter, and people seem to enjoy me from time to time. I'm a therapist in Dallas, born and raised Texan, which is one of the reasons I think I'm on this podcast, but also relevant to the podcast, a great appreciator of the West and the storytelling power of video games. And so here we are to discuss that. There's a lot more to me, but I think that's the most relevant bit for now.
All right. Fantastic. Sam.
All right, I'm Sam. I run the Master Samwise channel on YouTube, which recently made a video about Red Dead 2, specifically the character journey of Arthur Morgan back in January, February of this year, I think, because I played the game for the first time last year. And yeah, it is a truly fantastic story. I'm not really a Western guy typically. I'm a born and raised Minnesotan, but my mom is Texan. Grew up in North Carolina, so I've got a little bit of that blood in me. But yeah, I mean, it's just a fantastically told story, beautiful game, and I'm excited to talk about it more.
Good. Yeah, I should watch that video before this conversation.
I'm glad you did. I'm glad you played the game and didn't watch it before then. Get to go in fresh.
Yeah, yeah. And so I'm experiencing a lot of games fresh. I've mentioned a few times in these parts that I really took a break from video games for like a decade or so, just doing other things, kind of overcorrecting perhaps for playing too many games in my youth. But now stepping back in, I'm just discovering for the first time some of these incredible stories. And Red Dead 2 definitely is up there in the realm of incredible stories. In the last episode on this podcast, I did a solo episode connecting Arthur Morgan with the death of Ivan Ilyich by Tolstoy, which I think that there are some strong thematic connections there as you deal with a bad guy who yearns for nobility, yearns for goodness, and the way that he has to come to terms with that through wrestling with his own mortality. And I should say that there will be spoilers, the nature of what we do here, for anyone listening. So starting off just generally, I mean, obviously we all think this is a great story. It's a great game. What do you think, looking at just the aesthetics here, what is it about the West? What is it about Westerns that tends to draw in, especially the American, I don't know, mythological spirit? Because it's really the cowboy, I would say, is the quintessential American folk hero, mythological hero. He is the closest we have to the European knight is the American cowboy, I would say. What is it about the West, about Westerns, that tends to draw us in. Um, Jeremy, I feel like you're probably equipped to say something about this.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm not gonna make this political other than to point out that at the moment of this recording, there's a lot going on with a certain U.S. senator wanting to sell federal land, particularly out west, and there's a lot of opposition to that. And so, to your question, Andrew, I think the reason, or one of the reasons for that, is because, at least in modern times, the West represents a way of life that we don't live anymore. We live in mostly we live in cities or towns. We're very modern. Everything is technologized and plugged in and digital and connected and all these things. And I live in Dallas, not the largest city in the country, and it's very claustrophobic, right? Everything is concrete and glass, and I can see about 10% of the night sky from my apartment balcony, which really bothers me because I know that there's a lot more than just that little 10% that I can see. And so when you think about the West, when you go out west, when you watch a Western movie or play a Western video game, you're confronted with wide open vistas and wild, untamed land. And that's today. If you go back into the idea of the Wild West, right, it was truly a lawless time, right? It was people just going out there and figuring it out as they went. And so I think what speaks to us about the West is just that there's something foreign about it compared to how we live today, but there's also something beautiful or romantic about it, right? The idea of packing it all up and just heading out west. Um, even in more modern times, back in the 60s and 70s, a lot of young people did that as a means of like their early adulthood rite of passage, right? Like going and just becoming a wanderer for a while, which is a very modern take on the Western idea. And so I don't know, there's something appealing about the freedom of wide open spaces and the way that it stokes our imagination. I don't know how much time either of you have spent out west, but when you're wandering through Colorado and you're at the base of a 14er, you're looking up at this huge, massive land that seems just impossibly big. You can't help but feel very small. And some people find that very uncomfortable, but I think a lot of people find that very refreshing. It takes away a lot of the sense of I have to figure everything out. The world is on my shoulders. It's like, no, it's not. You're actually a very small piece of a much larger world, a much larger natural thing that you are a part of, but a small part of it. Um, so I'll stop it there for now and throw it over to Sam, but those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I think you touched on a lot of you touched on a lot more than I would have said on that. So there's an interesting book which I haven't finished reading, called Red Dead's History. It's by a history professor named Tor C. Olson, I believe. And he's clearly of a different political ilk than I am, and that reflects in how he views his history. But he does have a lot of interesting points that he makes, where as like as industrialization, everything started to set in, especially now in our modern era, where I work in technology, right? So I work at a keyboard and with screens, both my job and my hobby, making YouTube videos. I work with all this tech, and there is this kind of innate urge almost in me to like want to work with my hands. So when I get to do a little house project, whether it's just putting up blinds or painting something or doing a little bit of yard work, it feels good, right? It feels natural. It feels like this. I needed that. And as even in like the setting of Red Dead 2 in 1899, things were starting to move away from that. Firearms, for example, were being manufactured in factories en masse, right? They were, revolvers were no longer unique artisanal pieces, right? It was just like, now Colt was manufacturing them by the hundreds, thousands. And so you kind of touched on this when we talk about the romanticization of the West, is the time when men worked with their hands, when men were free in a sense. Like you could explore and wander, and you got to do traditional man stuff. That was all you had. Now you could do really, and so like there is a little bit of a identity crisis within masculinity, because it's just like, well, this is what we've been doing for centuries, working with our hands and everything, and it's all of a sudden it's shifted again. That began with the industrial evolution, I really think, and kind of continued through today. um, so I think that's part of it. The romanticization of the cowboy is interesting, because cowboys were in reality just kind of like glorified sheep herders, except they were they're men, not dogs, and they're wrangling cattle. They're just getting cows from one place to the next, eventually get them to Chicago or whatever, so they could be shipped off to the East Coast to be slaughtered. They weren't anything really all that special. They just spent a lot of time out in the open field. And it reminds me of like the Eastern, kind of ideal man, especially Japanese, is the samurai, right? Every people have the glorified ideas of samurai, and they're very romanticized in fiction. And then you read about the actual history of samurai, and like, no, they were just kind of, they were largely bullies. They were men in power and with swords who could do whatever they wanted without really any repercussions, as long as they were doing those awful things to people beneath them in status. And but they are, glorified or, romanticized because of this, supposed code of honor that they lived according to. And I think you see the same sort of thing with the cowboy, where you take the aspect of it that we kind of long for, like Jeremy said, that freedom, that freedom, that open country, that experience of vastness, and you kind of focus in on that, and some other aspects like their supposed their toughness, their no nonsense attitude, and you kind of leave out the bits where they really were just kind of lowly workers, that just rode horses with a bunch of cows from one place to the next. So yeah, I think I'll end there for now.
And I had one more thing just to go along with that. I found this quote just happenstantially this morning, that I think is relevant, so I'm going to read it now. It comes from Teddy Roosevelt. We know Teddy Roosevelt. We like Teddy Roosevelt. He wrote or said, I'm not sure which, but he communicated, the West, with its boundless prairies, its mighty rivers, and its rugged mountains, is a land of infinite possibilities, where the strong thrive and the weak are tested. And so I think that, going back to what me and Sam have said, I think that it's, the infinite possibilities. You don't know what you're getting when you go out west, right? And it's a very scary thing, and a lot of people fold under that pressure. But kind of like Frank Sinatra said about New York City, if I can make it here, I can make it anywhere. That's kind of the same out west, or at least it was, back when it was untamed. If you can carve a living for yourself out there, you can do it anywhere. And I think that idea still exists. I think it still pervades the popular imagination of the West, that it is rugged and it's wild and untamed. But again, there's something, going back to what Sam said, there's something very appealing about just like rolling up your sleeves and getting to it and seeing what you can put together.
Yeah, there's a lot to comment on there. First of all, well, Sam, thanks for disenchanting us from the great American mythology. Uh,
Anytime.
but to that point in particular about, okay, what were the Cowboys really like on a regular basis? I think it's natural that as the fact of something, the historical reality starts to, well, fade into history, that our imagination naturally begins to gravitate up toward the ideal, toward the archetype. Because there are certain things that we all long for. I mean, when we think about the European knight, normally we think of this great, noble warrior, which, I mean, I'm sure there were such knights, but that obviously is not all knights were good guys, put it that way. But we tend to think about them as the ideal virtuous warrior because we have certain certain desires, certain inklings of what human nature is supposed to be, like what the ideal person is. So naturally, our imagination starts to move these historical realities up into this realm of myth, this realm of archetypes, and really that's what a myth is. Um, Carl Jung says that the myth is it's like a public dream, and dreams themselves are often well, there are our desires for what could be, maybe what should be, what we want to be, and um, to what Jeremy was talking about the West being just this big, expansive place that helps to break us out of our claustrophobia. Um, it makes me think of the major differences between pre-modern and postmodern thought. In that, in postmodern thought, we always talk about how we want to contextualize reality within ourselves. What does this mean for me? Right? We contextualize reality within myself. I'm going to speak my truth, that sort of talk. Whereas if you look at the pre-moderns, for the most part, they're not going to talk about this language of, live your truth, of contextualize reality within yourself. They can talk about how do we contextualize ourselves within reality, right? When you're going to the ancient Greeks, you're going to Plato, going to Aristotle, like as much as they may have some disagreements with each other, they begin with the presupposition that there's such a thing as capital R reality, that there is a good that I didn't come up with, but that I have a responsibility to contextualize myself within. And that's how you grow in virtue. That's how you get closer to being the ideal person. And I think that's fundamentally true, which is why um, the even the most radical postmodern, that when they experience a sunset, look out over the ocean, maybe even experience a good storm. I mean, I'll ask my students sometimes, like, how many of you, as long as you're in a safe place or you're relatively safe, how many of you enjoy like a really good storm? And most students will raise their hands and say, yeah, I get it. And if I ask them why, they'll usually say, because it just kind of makes me feel small, which sounds like it should be a bad thing, but it's actually a very human thing. It's something that we long for because it's the way that we are supposed to be. And so I think that there is something very grounding about getting outside of our hyper controlled environments that most of us experience, right? We live in the safety of society. We live in the safety of our own lives, which as much as we're able to, we can kind of manage and shape the way we want to. But when you just get out into this idea of the expanse, well, suddenly now you're not in control, and that's potentially a very good thing. So I think I think that's at least in part why the West, the American West, has such a strong mythos for us.
Yeah, the idea of awe is something that like we all have this deep longing for, awe and wonder, right? I mean, it's where we get the words awesome and wonderful. And I know that you have a tweet that still sticks in my mind to this day, Andrew, about like people, I think it's maybe in Beowulf where someone or something is described as awesome. And your students are like, why are they using such a mundane word? And you said something to the effect of, why have you like made this incredible word so so mundane, like we should not take this word as that, because awesome is inspiring awe, which is this incredibly, I don't even want to say primal, it is like god-given feeling for us as we experience like the just incredible depth and height and width of like the created universe, right? Like awe and wonder are supposed to ultimately point us to God, and like that's what we experience in our smallness in the middle of a thunderstorm, where it's just wow. Like it gives you the sense like there is like I am so small and I like something is so big. Like what is that? It really just it kind of draws you out of yourself, right? And so much of like postmodern thought, you've said most things you see on most modern writing or whatever is so focused on the self and just looking at yourself, and it doesn't look outside, and that's what like experiences like that force you to do. um and I think relating this to the game, um I mean that is the experience that you get just riding through the open country, and I think it's a large part of the reason why the developers let you just do that, where you just spend time riding from place to place and experiencing the absolute vastness of the world and the enormous amount of possibilities that you have, all the thousands of little interactions you could do. It's awesome.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't want to push the conversation too quickly, but there is that moment early on in the game where you're out of the opening area, you're out of the tutorial area, You get to Horseshoe Bend, right? And that's where the game really opens up. And now it's truly an open world, and you can go anywhere and you can do whatever you want. And there's this, I'm sure you both went there. There's this overlook in the camp there in Horseshoe Bend where it's right on the cliff, and down there is the bend from which it gets its name. But it's such a view. And up to this point, the game has been very again, very confined. You're up in the mountains and it's snowing, and so visibility is limited. And again, using the word claustrophobic because everyone's just huddled together to stay warm and survive. And then you get down there into the plain, and it's just the game literally and mechanically just opens up. And that's when the player really gets a sense, going back to what you were saying, Sam, about awe, to the extent that you can experience awe in a virtually curated experience. That's when the player first gets it, because that's when the player first really sees like this game is wide open, which again, that's the West, right? That moment, I don't know if either of you played Breath of the Wild, the one of the Zelda games, but early on in Breath of the Wild, Link, he comes out from this cave and it's at the very beginning. He stands on this cliff and it just shows all of the map. And it's this very cinematic moment. And that's when the player realizes, like, oh, wow, there's a lot of adventure to be had here, right? Um, and there's a very, it's not quite as curated, but there's that very similar moment in Red Dead, and it's bracing, right? It just makes you stop for a moment and just kind of like, even though it's a video game, you kind of want to just stop and take pictures and look around and imagine the possibilities. So maybe that's what the West is, and is it's just one big possibility.
Yeah, I think that kind of sudden realization of possibility, right? You come out of, and I'll admit, I was getting kind of tired of the introduction. It's a very slow intro,
Yeah.
which
Everyone does.
yeah, like I guess I can appreciate what they're doing story, wise, and they're taking you by the hand toward teaching you how to play the game, but it's so incredibly slow. But just like whenever you're walking around camp, I get so frustrated with how slowly he walks. But that aside, to your point, that moment of entering into expansiveness past the intro territory, that this is something you see, or at least in a number of video games that are kind of in similar space genre wise. Like, for example, Bethesda does this a lot, where you leave the opening area, the prison in Oblivion, the cave in Skyrim, the vault in Fallout, and there's just like this moment where everything is bright and expansive, and now suddenly you can just go wherever you want to. It's a way of just awakening you to possibility, to the glory of exploration. And I think that something similar does happen in Red Dead, and I think that there's something good about that. That and this is part of my ongoing thesis of doing this whole project and talking about games at all. As somebody who's primarily had a literary and philosophical focus for a number of years, that I think there's something good about enchantment. There's something good about wonder. There's something good about, even if it is in this confined design space, there's something good about the possibilities of exploration, forging your identity, deciding what kind of character you are. Because all of those things, if you're engaging them the right way, you can engage in video games or anything the wrong way. But if you're engaging it in the right way, I think it makes you more of a curious kind of person, a person who's more given over to wonder. And so to just really just echoing what Jeremy said, I think that is a good moment. It's a good launching place to the wonder and enchantment that this game has to offer.
Yeah, not a lot of people know this about me, but years ago, I actually wrote essays about video games for an upstart video game website. I have no idea what's become of it since. But one of the essays I do remember writing was about Breath of the Wild, and it was about this very idea of enchantment and encouraging curiosity. I wrote about the environmental storytelling in that particular game. how so much of the story was just told by the ruins that you wander through or the towns that populated the map, and how all of this was based on Kyoto, Japan, which is where the developers and the writers were from, how they based the map off of Kyoto, and it encourages, again, it encourages that awareness that the world is a lot bigger than my bedroom or my office or even my home. The world is a very big place, and there's a lot to explore and to do and to see and to try. Um, and Red Dead, I think, does an excellent job of that because not only is the story wildly engaging, and I'm sure we'll get into that in due course, but just the world itself. There's so many characters to interact with and things to do. And do you want to be a good guy? Do you want to be a bad guy? Do you want to be just kind of middle of the road? You have this total choice. And again, I'm going to hammer on this all morning. The idea of the West is, what are you going to do? You're going to get out there. Who are you going to become? What are you going to build? And I think that Red Dead does a good job of that, not only in a video game perspective, but also uh, for people with eyes to see and ears to hear. I think it's a good way of reminding the player that, like, there's a real world out there. You can live it, and to a large degree, you can choose how you live it too. Um, do you want to be the good guy, the bad guy? Do you just want to be an NPC? Uh, yeah, so I really like what you're doing with video games because I think that there's a lot of value that can be taken from them, and I think that Red Dead is a good way to is a good carrier of that value.
Yeah, and maybe at this point, now that we've done we've talked about just the general aesthetic, the general experience, maybe we should talk about the story a little bit. So I think it's a great story. It could easily be turned into a movie. Um, what what about the story? You can get as general specific as you want to. What about this story is compelling to you? Or maybe I should ask, did you guys play Red Dead 1?
I have not yet. It's on my list. My like very it'll probably be like the next game that I play.
Okay, then we're all in the same boat there. I
Yeah.
was going to ask if anyone can share any
Well,
insights on that connection there, but okay, fair enough.
I don't think there's a whole lot because Arthur does not feature at all in Red Dead 1. It's just John. I mean, I think there's other members of the gang who you see in Red Dead 2 that carry over to Red Dead 1 because Red Dead 2 is the prequel. Um,
Yeah, I'm familiar with the
no.
story, and yeah, it's a sequel to the prequel that would become Red
Yeah.
Dead.
Mhm.
Um, and there's a from what I know, it seems like there are a lot of seeds in the first one that are realized or that grow in the second. Yeah, that's the extent of my knowledge.
And I know that the like John Marston was a very beloved protagonist. And when the release trailer or the whatever trailer dropped for Red Dead 2, and it was revealed that you're going to be playing as this Arthur Morgan guy, all the fans of the original game were like, "Who's this? I want to play as John. What are we doing? Like, what's going on?" And then they played the game and went, "Okay, and yeah, no, that was I like this guy.
Yeah,
Never mind."
Right.
yeah,
Whereas now playing Red Dead 2 first, I feel like if I played Red Dead 1, I'd want to be Arthur Morgan, right?
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely.
Which obviously can't work for obvious reasons. Um, so okay, so just focusing on Red Dead 2. What about the story, as generally or specifically as you want to get with it? Like, what makes this a compelling story to you?
I mean, the title is right. It's right there in the name. It's a story about redemption, and I really love that I mean, they handle it the way they do. Again, there are different endings to this story, right? So, how redeemed do you want your Arthur to be, right? My Arthur was max honor, right? I played, I got through all the, all the missions that you could play. I think with only if you have high honor. Um, and it's just this incredible story about just like finding goodness where it can be found, right? Because you have this guy who like grew up without a mother with apparently abusive father, right? Arthur says like, I watched my dad die and it couldn't have happened soon enough. um who was raised by a egotistical sociopathic maniac. Grew up on the streets in a life of crime that he just fell into because that's how you survived. And the fact that he just sought for nobility, right? That he was able to at all find some sort of self gift within himself that he could give to someone else is truly remarkable, right? So, I mean, that's just very broadly what you start from that foundation, and there is so much to work with. And they did a fantastic job executing on that theme.
Yeah, I when I played, I've only played once so far. At some point, I need to go
Okay.
back and do it again with a more compelling character arc because I didn't really, I didn't have it mapped out who my Arthur Morgan was, and so I yeah, I started off kind of neutral, going dishonorable because it's fun to rob trains and stuff, but eventually, once I recognized that. No, I feel like Redemption makes sense for a game called Redemption. That obviously they're pushing you in that direction. Like there is a good ending and a bad ending, not just morally speaking, but like there's an ending that makes more sense. That would be the honorable ending. And so eventually it got to that point in the story. I figured, no, I should turn it around, but I just wasn't consistent enough. So it's kind of a schizophrenic character. But taking the honorable path, taking the redemption path, I think it really is a profound story, it's a profound character arc. As you said, you got this guy who's raised in this pretty lousy environment, but it's all that he knows. And even within that environment of outlaws, they're robbing people and killing people and whatnot. That he's obviously someone who's striving for virtue, which is why he prizes loyalty so much because like that's the virtue that he knows at least, and so he's maintaining fidelity to that. Even Tolkien says that Sauron was better than Morgoth, if for no other reason than for a time he was loyal to someone beyond himself. It's like loyalty is a good thing, even if it's in the wrong context. And so he's trying to hold on to the good that he knows. And eventually, as he continues in this path and he's faced to come to terms with his own mortality and ask the questions that mortality always makes us face of what's truly important that allows him to see through the lies of Dutch, the lies of this deceitful father figure, and start to carve out his own path, moving in a different, ideally more positive direction. And that's very much why I connected to Ivan Ilyich, similar arc there. But I think that there's something just deeply redemptive about that, something deeply upbuilding about that's striving for goodness and hopefully finding it in the end.
Yeah. I would only add to that you mentioned Andrew, you mentioned loyalty, and that was obviously a very clear through line in the entire game. I almost said book, in the entire game. Um, some of the later conversations between Arthur and John, when the writing is on the wall and the gang is really beginning to fall apart. Arthur and John talk very explicitly about like, well, what about loyalty? Yeah, well, look where that loyalty has gotten us, right? And so Arthur is still Arthur is still acting according to that loyalty, but he's seeing that it was misplaced, right? And so that shows that striving towards virtue, the base the base loyalty was always there, and now it's growing and flourishing and kind of coming into its own. But beyond that, if you're playing as I believe the game is meant to be played, which is more high honor, hence redemption. Uh, he's also motivated by love, right? Like I can't remember what was the name of his love interest in the
Mary
game.
Linton.
Mary Linton. Yeah, that's right. So like if you read his journal entries and you do all the missions or the quests that involve him and Mary, like that wasn't just some body sort of Western thing or fling. That was a guy who grew up in an environment where men didn't talk about love, and he was experiencing these very tender feelings towards this woman that maybe he didn't know how to express or even act upon, but he was very clearly feeling them and acting upon them. But also, towards the end when she finally gets on the train and goes away, uh, he wants to go with her. You can see that he wants to just throw it all away and just tell Dutch to go pound sand. I'm out of here. But what does he say? Well, I got to get this one more score, right? We just got to do this one more job, get some money, and then I'm gone, right? And so there's that pull between that we all know all too well. We've all been in situations where it's like, here's the path I should go, but oh, this one over here. And as far as I know, the game doesn't give you an option, right? Like
No.
you have to exactly. And so it's a little bit directed there, but Arthur was very clearly uh he was very clearly aware that there's more to loyalty than just the gang,
Yeah.
right? There are levels or layers of loyalty, and he was feeling this pull towards a higher form, a more exclusive sort of loyalty. And he couldn't quite get there. And that leaves the player asking, like, what might have been? What might have been? How would I mean, at that point the die was cast for Arthur, but how might his last days have been different had he gotten on that train, right?
So even in that scene, he says like there's some things I need to take care of, like one more score and all that. But he also, I forget if he says there's people I need to see too. But it's very he at that point he's very clearly thinking of John and Abigail and Jack, right? So like
Yeah,
they're kind of his big motivation in
yeah.
the final. Like he's got to get them to safety. That's what he needs to take care of. So yeah, if he had chosen to go with Mary to get it all, I don't think I could fault him for that at all, but his motivation to stay is very much loyalty based. It's
Sure.
and like a more true loyalty, right? Um it's not just about money. Like he wants to see to his gang for their legitimate good. So
Mhm.
like the evolution of Arthur's idea of loyalty throughout the game is really fantastic. Where at the beginning it's like I'm loyal to Dutch. I'll do what Dutch says. I trust Dutch to guide us as as he sees fit. And it kind of evolves into be loyal to what matters, which is what he tells John. I mean that in that scene you were alluding to, it's when they're it's after they've like set the dynamite on the train tracks,
Yeah,
and Arthur is telling John like like this is all just about done. When the time comes, you get Abigail and Jack, you get the hell out of here.
yeah.
And John asks, "What about loyalty?" Arthur says, "Be loyal to what matters." Right. So this is what's kind of come to Arthur over the course of. I mean, we're near the end of the game at this point, where he's realized that okay, loyalty does not mean obedience, right? Loyalty means seeking. I mean, loyalty means essentially love, or it means like seeking the good of the people that you are loyal to, the people that have been placed in your life that you are obliged to take care of.
Yeah.
And so I think I mean, that's really beautiful, like character evolution as Arthur kind of understands like the actual virtue in loyalty rather than loyalty just being a trait or a characteristic.
Yeah, and this thought just came to me. There's also this memento mori aspect of it, right? Like Arthur's thoughts only really begin to change and he really begins to act on them when he gets his diagnosis, right? When he sees like, oh crap, my days are not just numbered as they all are, but highly numbered or lowly numbered as it were. That's when he really starts taking these thoughts that have been kind of percolating in his brain, like, is Dutch losing it? Is he not the man he once was? That's when, the scales fall from the eyes and he sees like, you know what? Now is the time to do something about it, right? I don't have a lot of time, so let's make the time that I have count. Um, which I think that's the kind of clarity that can only come through a deep awareness of one's not just one's mortality, but one's pending mortality. There's um there's a great scene in one of the early episodes of Band of Brothers where there's a soldier and he's afraid as all soldiers were and he's kind of cowering in a foxhole, and then there's another soldier, Lieutenant Spears, who is just kind of like a man's man, right? Like he runs into the battle all the time and everything, and they're talking about the foxhole soldier says like, how do you do it? How do you like just throw yourself into these fights? And Lieutenant Spears says, you gotta you gotta accept that you're already dead, right? Until you accept that you're already dead, you can't do the one thing that a soldier is supposed to do, which is throw himself into the fight with reckless abandon. But once you accept that, then it's just a matter of pulling the trigger, right? And that's good. It's good good advice for folks in the military, but I think it's good advice for all of us. And you see that with Arthur, right? Because again, he's a dead man. He's a dead man walking. And so what does it matter if he acts on these deep thoughts and feelings that he's having and maybe offends some people that he's always been loyal to? What does it matter? Because now he's finally acting really and truly in accordance with, I'm going to use my therapist hat here. He's acting really and truly in accordance with his own values, right? Like he sees loyalty in a completely new way and he's acting according to that. And yeah, I'll leave it there.
Yeah. And similar to what you just said there about from Band of Brothers, I was recently reading the letters of Seneca as I'm putting together this Plato Stoicism Until We Have Faces course that's coming up. And Seneca says that, well, you're going to spend far more time dead than you are alive. And so, basically live accordingly. Like, make that your primary thought. And of course, how much more value does that hold for the Christian when we consider the difference between the eternal and the temporal? And um, that this loyalty, this idea that this virtue that he's had perhaps in shadow that's now coming more into substance in light of his mortality. Well, first of all, I should say that as I played this game, I didn't know the overarching story. I didn't know how things were going to play out. And so I was actually very surprised when this tuberculosis thing just takes him over. I didn't see that coming because it's not something you expect in a video game for them to just like throw in this major plot element that seems to come out of nowhere. I mean, looking back, you know that okay, he caught it when he was beating up this debtor who coughed in his face, but like you don't think about that in the moment, and so it's very much this kind of movies situation where they just bring in this major plot element almost out of nowhere, which I think is fantastic. But anyways, so yeah, he starts to see more clearly, and going back to his relationship with Mary. I mean, it very much could be argued that in turning her down, at least for a time, but I mean, really ultimately, that he was demonstrating loyalty even to her, right? Because he knew that this was not going to be a good life for her, even if it would be for him for his remaining days. That not only was he dying, but that he's still an outlaw, right? Like this is no life for a respectable woman that he actually cares about. And well, you feel for him, and you want them to go off onto the sunset together, and him live an honest, good life with the days that he has left. That on some level, he must have known it wasn't going to work. It shouldn't work. And at that point, he's kind of a tragic hero, or it has this death to self idea that comes with the right relationship to mortality.
Hmm.
There's a letter that you get from Mary very near the end of the game where she returns like the ring that he gave her. Right? So they were engaged apparently before her family kind of stepped in. Is the sense that we get. And she says, "You're a good man, Arthur, but you're wrestling with a giant, and the giant wins time and again." Um, and then flash forward to again, this is assuming you are playing as High Honor Arthur, and I think it might be only in the one ending. So there's four possible endings, right? Whether High Honor, Low Honor, and then if you go with John or you go back to get the money, right? The ending I got was the High Honor going with John, and so in this ending, Arthur is kind of he's down, he's dying, he's crawling, and Ica says, "You lost, my sick friend." And Arthur says, "No, Micah, it seems that despite my best efforts, I've won." Um, and I'm pretty sure that he's referring to that letter, right? Or that he's referring to this battle between, himself and the giant being his life experience, right? All the people that are around him, all his vices and negative tendencies that, just turn him time and time again to the life of an outlaw. And here he's like, I've won. I've broken free of that. I've helped someone else break free of that. Right. I've become, at least in this one act, a good man. And I think it's so beautiful in a number of ways, but just like what others can inspire us to do. Right. Where Mary is, she's not, she didn't have Arthur's life. And Arthur could very easily resent her for that fact, where it's like, you shouldn't. Who are you to judge me? You grew up in wealth and life of ease. right? She was widowed, so there's that. She has experienced some hardship, to be fair, but he doesn't hold any of that against her, right? He just wants to be worthy of her, right? But isn't willing to sacrifice his loyalty to his friends to do so, to become that gentleman or whatever, as if he'd be expected anyway. So I don't know. I absolutely love that moment where Arthur's like, I've beaten that giant. So.
Hmm. I've never made that connection before, but I like that connection a lot. I'm going to go with the idea that that's intended, because that's just too perfect not to be a callback to that layer. That's God, what a game! What a game!
Yeah, and I mean that idea of winning though he's dying, by any kind of traditional worldly power concerns, I mean, he did lose, right? I mean, he lost by getting tuberculosis, according to just a, survival of the fittest sort of mentality, a will to power mentality. He became weak, and it could be argued that he became weak by his desire for a virtue that extends beyond his own self-preservation. It makes me think of obviously I've been doing a lot with Lewis over the last few years, but in medieval cosmology, when they talk about the influences of the heavens, that the martial influence, the influence of Mars, that it not only is what guides the noble knight who goes out and gains victory in combat against the forces of evil, but also it's the influence that leads the noble martyr. Hence the name martyr, right? It's the martial spirit, but portrayed in a different kind of way. It's the resolve, the victory that comes through fighting against the own shadows of your own temptation, as well as the evil forces that would come against you and do you harm for doing what is good. And so being a martyr for a noble cause is a certain kind of embodiment of the martial spirit, which it goes with this idea that though he died, though he was disenfranchised from his gang, he ultimately was, I mean, he suffered death for his desire for virtue, even though death would have come eventually, as it would for all of us, that he still gained victory. He died a noble warrior of sorts. And I think that is it's a very Christian idea. I mean, obviously, Rockstar isn't going to take that all the way and have him have a literal come to Jesus moment, but at the same time, I think it's I mean, it's almost about as close as you can get to embodying the Christian ideal without explicitly embodying the Christian ideal.
Did
Yeah.
you play the missions where you had like, the conversations with Sister Calderon?
Yes.
Okay.
Remind us of the significance of that. It's kind of
So,
hazy to me.
I mean, I missed them when I don't think I even played them when I first played through the game, and then I saw one of the scenes on YouTube and went, "Oh my goodness, I need to play this mission." So basically, it starts out where I forget how it is exactly. You run into a brother in Saint Denis. I forget his name now. And you talk with him a little bit. He says he suspects um the like pawn shop or whatever around the corner is actually like trafficking slaves, basically. So Arthur goes, investigates, finds the slaves, brings them to the brother. He gets them, to their shelter or wherever. Um, and you meet him again and a sister from his order. And basically, you have a couple of missions where you talk to her and stuff, do various things. And then you run into her again at um at a train station where it's the whole during the Indian plot at the end where like there's the one army officer who's resisting his colonel's orders, right? To kind of who's really trying to basically his colonel is basically trying to shove the is it the
Wapiti?
Wapiti? Yeah, thank you. I was thinking Wamapuk. That's the Indian tribe from Parks and Rec. But he's trying to shove the Wapiti off their lands yet again. And so you kind of pull that officer out of there and get him on a train, send him off. And Arthur runs into Sister Calderon at the train station, and he just completely opens up to her. Right? I don't know if he's told anyone about his diagnosis to this point, but like he's like, yeah, I got TB. Like I'm dying, sister. And they have this conversation where like for the first time, he really admits, like he quite literally says, I'm afraid. And it just, I mean, the voice acting and the motion capture is perfect. Like the expression on his face is unreal. It's like this mask of like barely veiled like pain and terror. Um, and yeah, so that's where she tells him, take a gamble that love exists and do a loving act. Which, I mean, if you're at all versed in, I don't know, Trinitarian theology, at least this is how I've heard it time and again, is that God in three persons is an eternal exchange of love, right? You know, the phrase "God is love" has been said many, countless times. Um, and so like I mean, I think that's just a beautiful example of like how to evangelize to someone when you have 30 seconds to do it. And like, you don't, I was like, where do I start? Right. What do I even say? And she says, take a gamble that love exists. Um, and I think that's, yeah. So I'm like, this is, again, Rockstar's not a Christian company, but it was like, that's a very Christian idea right there. And I love that they included that because again, redemption is kind of Christianity's whole thing. And the fact that they made this character, this sister, so I mean, again, she's optional. You don't have to run into her. If you don't, you run into Reverend Swanson, and his scene's pretty good too. Um, but yeah, it's like it's remarkable. It's like wow. I mean, they lay it right out there. It's an incredibly emotional. It's a beautiful scene.
Yeah, no notes. That's I was hoping you would bring that up. I was shocked that they included that in the game because it's like, this is the same developer that really built its reputation on being able to carjack people and shove hookers into trunks. And, in the GTA series, and now here they are, intentionally or not, including such a fundamentally Christian idea into this game about the Wild West. It was a very welcome surprise when I came across that.
You can still hog tie people and feed them to alligators. That is, you can still do those things.
Fair point.
Yeah.
Point.
I don't know much about the GTA games, but I've heard from like Catholic friends of mine that as I once said, like he's like considers it equivalent to like Breaking Bad in terms of kind of the story, right? I know GTA is this huge open world like Red Dead 2, where you can just go be a complete and total miscreant if you want to. Um, but it has this kind of when the actual story and these characters, it's like no person of an actually relatively well formed conscience should want to be like
Yeah,
Jason. I think is the main character in the GT series. Maybe that's the new one. I don't know.
yeah.
It's like yeah, no person should want to be like Walter White in Breaking Bad, and yet a lot of people do because people don't have super well formed consciousness, and that I think that's a trap that or a pitfall when you're developing or writing a story about depraved people. There, if they exhibit any sort of strength, then people, young men, are going to look up to and admire them, even when you definitely didn't intend that.
Yeah. Yeah, but on the idea of showing strength and the scene that we were just talking about, like that was arguably one of the strongest moments in Arthur's story, assuming that you played it, was because you got the sense that that was like, as he was saying, I'm afraid, you got the sense that he was just coming to that realization himself, right? That didn't seem like something that had a thought that had been consciously rolling around in his head until the words came out of his mouth. And for big bad tough enforcer in a cowboy gang, Arthur Morgan, you don't admit that you're afraid, right? This is a cold-blooded killer for all intents and purposes. And here he is talking to this little wispy, nun. She's 105 soaking wet and pretty close to death herself by the looks of it. And here he is basically giving a confession of sorts. Um, like that is a profound show of strength, just not in the way that you would expect. Um, but that's what makes it such an important inclusion, right? Because strength isn't just beating up a dude who's in debt and telling him to get your money. Strength is also that vulnerability and that admitting I'm not I'm not okay right now, right? And I don't know what to do about that. and the fact that Arthur Morgan's story resonates so pervasively across video game culture, I think that having those more vulnerable moments from, again, this big burly man's man, uh, I think that that was a very important inclusion, I think.
Yeah. Obviously Arthur Morgan at this point in the story, when he has this conversation with his sister, he is somebody who is well acquainted with death, just not his own. Um, I for a number of semesters now, I've taught a course at my state university called Life, Death, and Meaning. And the first class of that course each semester, at some point, I asked the question, how many of you know that you're going to die? And everyone raises their hand, like, okay, that's kind of a ridiculous question. And then everyone raises their hand, and then I'll follow up with, how many of you have thought about the fact that it is you that is going to die? Suddenly they're a little less a little less jovial in the response to that question. It's no longer such an obvious answer because on some level, like on paper, we all know that we're mortal. We all know that we're going to die. It's a very different thing to recognize that like my existence in the way that I currently know it is going to come to an end. And we can do a number of things with that dread that we all inevitably experience. Either, it can be transmuted into something good, as we find in the Christian gospel, or we can just hide from it and play the coward and just pretend like it's not there. But as we see in Tolstoy's Ivan Ilyich, like it's always going to haunt you on some level. You can't avoid it completely. It's always going to be there, casting a shadow on the good times and the bad times. Or you can just live in absolute dread, and that's not necessarily healthy either. Given those options, I feel like there's only one positive solution. But fortunately, it's the real one, the true one. But that I would argue that if you've never had that moment where you've recognized not just I'm going to die, but it is me that is going to die, then I don't think you've come to terms with what human life actually is. You can't understand anything, the good times or the bad times. You can't understand your experience unless you fully recognize your mortality, which is why we have this memento mori idea. Remember your death. Remember that you're going to die, because when you recognize it within that light, then suddenly what you do actually gains significantly more significance. And that in turn makes your life more worth living. It's the kind of thing that can actually give you more joy, more meaning, more substance, recognizing that you're going to die, as paradoxical as that seems on the surface. And so when Arthur Morgan admits, I'm afraid, that is, as we've been talking about, it's a powerful moment of just discovering something fundamental to the human experience.
There's a there's a quote from Alexander Solzhenitsyn. It's a long one, so I won't recite it here. But in the quote, he makes the point that if if human life were all just about having fun and experiencing pleasure, then we wouldn't be made to die. And so the fact that we are made to die, the fact that all of our lives end in death, must mean or suggest or at least indicate that there is something higher that we're supposed to do. Um, and so again, I think that we see that I think that we see that in the story of Arthur Morgan, right? Like before the diagnosis, he's not exactly living a life of pleasure or fun, but he's living a very violently hedonistic life. He's part of this gang that's the last vestige of the Wild West, because one of the subplots is the gang keeps getting pushed further and further to the peripheries because the world is civilizing, and they don't want to civilize with it. They want to stick with the lawless ways of the old world. Um, and and Arthur is very much a part of that. But after the diagnosis, he realizes there's stuff that I got to do, right? There are important things that I need to set right. Um, so yeah, I wanted to incorporate Solzhenitsyn, and I've done that, so mission accomplished.
Yeah, and I think that this arc that we've been discussing hits a high point toward the end when we have the stuff with the Indian chief that we just mentioned it. What was the tribe's name?
PD.
Wapiti.
Yeah, the Wapiti. So you've got the chief who he's just so tired of conflict. He just wants peace, really above everything else. And then he's got his Warhawk son who wants justice, wants revenge. Like he just wants to go to battle, even if they die. He figures, well, that's a better way to go out than just fading off into nothingness. But Arthur, he really sympathizes with the father who is just so tired of the conflict. And I think that is just a good continuation of this arc where, Arthur Morgan is a guy who's lived in conflict his entire life, but he just is so tired. In many ways, he's preparing for a life that he could never possibly find on the side of things as he increasingly comes to terms with death. And if you ever had a season of your life that's given over to particular conflict, to drama, to tension, like we can all probably sympathize with that. I just want peace, even if that doesn't necessarily lead to practical solutions.
There's a line that Arthur says when he's talking to Chief Rainsfall, and he says like, it's like I killed a lot of people for a lot of dumb reasons, and I ain't never seen any glory in it. And like putting that quote against like the backdrop of what he's experiencing right now, where he's facing his own mortality, and he's realizing how many people he's sent to to meet their own. Especially because like he, as Charles tells him at some point around this, that like he's been given a gift, right, where he like gets to see his end coming, and to prepare for it, to take time to make things right. Whereas who knows what what was in the lives of all those people that he killed, right? Well, they never got time to consider, to just consider their end, to have a deathbed, to see it coming. And yeah, it's doubtless that's running through his mind. And I think that's kind of going to the end of the story. So in the low honor ending where you go up the mountain with John, Arthur dies by getting shot through the face point blank by Micah. And I remember I was watching that on YouTube because so I was like, okay, what are the other endings after I'd finished mine? And I was like, oh, I mean, it like viscerally shocked me. It's it kind of is violent, and it's kind of it's almost appropriate. We're like, yeah, that makes sense, right? Of course you did. Of course this happened. But it robs Arthur of those final moments that he gets in that high honor ending, where he's lying there and facing the sunrise, literally and metaphorically looking towards a new day, right? If even if that literal new day will not be for him, but it's a gift he's given to John and his family. So like, yeah, when he's lived his life, his last days in this, just continued despicable fashion, and hence, the low honor, and it just ending suddenly and violently without him getting those, final moments of peace is, yeah, it's like, oh, it's stunning.
Yeah, and that symbolism of dying facing the sunrise, there's the symbol of resurrection is there, that he dies with the new day. And which again connects to Ivan Ilyich, if you've read that as the main character, as he's dying, there's all kinds of symbolism of resurrection built into that scene, even to the point of the last words he hears, which weren't spoken with any great significance, but they are to him. The last words he hears before he dies is "It is finished," and so there's all this symbolism built into that scene, and I think that we definitely see that with High Honor Arthur Morgan dying, that there's life even in death when death is approached in the right manner. I think often in Tolkien that the hope is in the West, yet Aragorn says at Helm's Deep that dawn is always the hope of man, which obviously the dawn is in the east. And so it's like we look toward the west, toward the sunset. We look toward death with the hope that there's a sunrise on the other side, right?
Mm.
And I think that on perhaps a less significant but still significant level, we see that symbolism here with the death of Arthur Morgan in the sunrise.
Well, Arthur even says in an earlier conversation at camp, I didn't happen to find this one, It's just a random encounter you can have in camp where the gang is discussing like how they want to be buried or how they want to die. Um, I forget which exactly. I found it just I was doing research on the internet and seeing all that. And Arthur tells them, I don't really care. Just bury me facing west so I can remember all the good times we have. And I think he might actually be buried in that fashion if you watch the end credits. But the fact that he does die facing east is kind of like it kind of flips that on its head a little bit, which is cool.
Hmm.
Where he's no longer looking back, he's looking forward, just not for himself. Especially as far as life on Earth goes anyway, where he's looking forward for John, who he his last act was getting him to safety. And his family as well, which is another point of Christian symbolism that I wanted to bring up, which I was like, there's no way that wasn't intentional. It's a conversation Arthur has with Abigail and Sadie. I don't know, Sadie might be gone by that point, but it's Abigail and Sadie, and Jack's already gone. He's off to safety. Or Arthur is about to go back to camp to confront Dutch because we continue talking about loyalty. Arthur could just try to run away at this point, but he goes back to try to talk Dutch down. He feels like he owes it to Dutch to be like, you got to stop. We got to get out of here. But Abigail gives him like the key to the money, safe or whatever that Dutch has hidden. And she says, I always was a good thief. And I'm pretty sure, if I remember correctly, that right at that moment when she says the words good thief, like the last song that plays throughout Arthur's ride back to camp starts. And I'm like, yeah, there's no way you didn't do that on purpose. If it wasn't you on purpose, then like I swear that's like divine intervention sticking this into your game.
Hmm.
It's a really cool moment. And like I've gone back and revisited that scene and went,
Hmm.
no way.
Again, something I never caught, but that's intentional or not, like you say, intentional or divine intervention. That's that is a really interesting thing to include in a game that's not meant to be Christian, but that is a very interesting thing to include.
See, I think that these are things that you find whether you're talking about a movie or a game when the developer isn't giving you propaganda. Like when they're just trying to tell you a good story,
Hmm.
that naturally a lot of that's going to resonate with Christianity. It's the true myth, as Lewis has.
Sure.
And so when you're telling a good story, they're going to be, we should expect a lot of these connection points.
Mm.
And that's a good example. Well, is there anything else that you feel like should be mentioned that we haven't hit on at this point?
Mm.
I'm sure there's a million things, but I made a 2.5 hour video about the game. So like anytime you talk talking about a certain point, there's a line that pops into my head, but nothing off the top of my head at this point.
I mean, I guess just to summarize my thoughts on the matter is that there's a it's popular today to criticize video games for the admittedly very negative potential consequences that playing video games can have. We are all familiar with those. We don't need to go over those. But games like Red Dead Redemption 2, and there are other really good games, but in my experience, this may be the best of them. Games like this really, really lend credence to the idea that this is an overlooked medium in terms of value communication or philosophical communication. Like in terms of a medium for transmitting idea, because look at us, we've been talking for an hour about loyalty and love and honor and theology for crying out loud through a game about the West, right? And this game is a great example of what this particular medium can do if if done correctly, right? And it's a good reason for people who are more skeptical of video games as a whole to maybe reconsider them. That's why, again, Andrew, I'm really glad that you have taken on this particular project because there are a lot of good games that offer maybe not quite to this level, but that offer really good opportunities to pause and reflect on what a person's values are, what their beliefs are. What would I have done in that situation? That sort of thing. Not all of them, right? You're probably not going to get this from like Mario or something, but that would be wild if you did. But there are games that present this to those who are willing to look for it and do it in such an interesting way because they're interactive, right? They're not movies, they're not lectures, they are interactive where you are the character and you have to make the choices. And so that more than anything, the game is fun, it's great. Everyone should play it if they get the opportunity, all that. But more than that, the game is a standout for what video games can be. And I think that more than anything else, that's what I appreciate about this game.
Yeah, I think it's well said. And Sam and I have talked about this before that, if somebody is just interested in amusement, meaning not musing, then well, they're not likely to find a lot of value in video games or much else for that matter, right? If you're not looking for value, you're probably not going to find it. Alternatively, if you are looking for value, you typically will find it, especially in good, compelling stories like you find in Red Dead 2 in other games. And I've even made the argument that Tolkien says in On Fairy Stories that one of the reasons why literature is better than movies is that literature allows the participant, the reader, to participate in the act of subcreation. That not everything is just given to them, and so out of your own self, your experience, other things you've read, other things you've thought about, like the way that you cast the characters in a book, the visuals that you have, the sense experience, all of that is something that you are bringing to the story. And so that's what he thinks it makes literature better than film, and why he was kind of skeptical that Lord of the Rings could be adapted well, because so much of it is just given to you, thereby forbidding subcreation. Well, I've tried to make the argument that games can have that dimension of subcreation in a way that movies don't. Yeah, obviously there's still a lot that's given to you, and the visuals, the story, the structure, but I mean there's a lot given to you in books as well. But when you have this room to carve your own path, to participate with the protagonist, that it does provide that realm for like contributing something to the story, and I think that there is something upbuilding about that. Now, before I started talking, I think Sam was about to say something.
I think I was probably going to talk about that same point that I know you made when last we talked about video games, where yeah, I mean you are able to tell a story through your playthrough. Some games more than others. Some games have a very think games like God of War from 2018, where it's like they have a story to tell. You are participating in that story. You're not so much sub creating as you are in Red Dead 2. I'm not bashing God of War, by the way, but it is like it's more an interactive movie, a very fun one. It works great as a video game. I love the game to death, but it is far more of an interactive movie than a game like Red Dead 2, where you have actual choices that you make with the character, and just with like the various side quests which you can do, which God of War has too. Various side quests that you can pick up which contribute to your story, or just the interactions that you have. What kind of Arthur Morgan do you want to be? There's really only one Kratos. But there are thousands of potential Arthur Morgans. And this goes beyond Red Dead 2. You pick any sort of like, strategy game like XCOM, where you're playing through, you have a squad of soldiers and they die, and you bring, rise new ones up through the ranks and they die too. And, there's tons of storytelling that can be done through video games, even ones that aren't strictly story driven ones. And I think that is, really beautiful. But yeah, I mean, video games as this method of storytelling, or as a genre of storytelling or a medium for storytelling. There we go. I think absolutely have potential to be superior to film and television, because you have that interactive element where you really just are in the person of whoever you're playing as, and you fight as them, you talk as them, you choose what they say and what they do. It really kind of lets you put yourself more into that world and feel it more viscerally, which is fantastic. So especially as Hollywood continues to just not learn its lesson time and time again, and as like in indie and double A studios continue to step up and make games that have who knows they have the chance of going viral. Like I think I kind of hope, because I generally prefer games to TV and movies. I hope we see more games that just continue to tell great stories. And I hope, I think, but mostly I hope that we'll continue to see that, which brings me to one game that I've played very recently, which is kind of a little bit everywhere, at least on my core of the internet right now, which is called Claire Obscure Expedition 33. Um, I don't know if either of you have heard of it, by looks on your faces, I guess not. But it's a French developed game by a bunch of developers who, at least I think most of them were, they left. Did they leave Bethesda or no? They left Ubisoft.
Hmm.
It was Ubisoft. Yeah, they left Ubisoft, or at least the guy who started the studio did, and I'm sure he brought people with him. And they made I mean, it's in the style of Japanese RPGs, so it's kind of like turn-based, party-based combat. But it's a very story-driven game set in kind of like a post-apocalyptic fantasy France, essentially,
Hmm.
where groups of people every year are sent out to try to defeat the Paintress, this kind of mystical distant giant who is slowly erasing the population of their city. And so yeah, it's a really really philosophically fascinating story.
Hmm.
It goes into a lot of different elements about hope and grief, duty, and family. Um, so yeah, I mean, if you get the chance, it's well worth picking up. And it's not even I don't even say that because I'm like, oh, I agree with everything the game has to say. There's definitely a lot of its philosophy where I'm like, that's but it leaves a lot of it kind of open to the player to experience, to think about, right? Like I've said 100 times, I'm sure many other people have said this, that good stories prompt you to think. Bad stories tell you what to think. And Red Dead 2 is certainly one of those where it's like it gives you the story, and it gives you the journey, it lets you create it, and then it lets you think about it and talk about it for years and years after.
Yeah, when did Red Dead 2 release? Was it 28?
2018,
Yeah, and so
7
here
years
we are
ago.
in 2025, still
Yep.
still picking it apart.
I'm
Um,
sure it's still selling well too. I mean, I know it sold something like 70 million copies, which is utterly insane. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
well, good. I feel like it's a good conversation. We hit on the general aesthetic grounding experience of the story of the game. We hit on the story elements, especially this Memento Mori redemption arc. We hit the meta level of why video games can be profitable. Um, I think that the next episodes that are going to come out after this, we've got a couple that are actually already recorded on Zelda. After that, we're probably going to do a Mass Effect series, which I've just
Nice.
started playing through for the first time. And so I don't know if that interests you guys. You're more than welcome to attend. No obligation. We'll be in touch.
Yeah.
Um,
Man,
but
I played the trilogy. I'm trying to think, I played the Mass Effect trilogy for the first time, but probably like 4 or 5 years ago. And like I have the legendary edition. I was like, I gotta play this again. It's like I really want to make videos about it, but I've not found the time yet.
It's been I played the first two. I didn't get around to three, and then I heard things about three, and I decided not to finish the trilogy, which is very unlike me. But the first two were
Those are
uh
very good.
just chef kiss, just
Yeah.
amazing games.
yeah,
Very KOTOR like, right? I think they were even developed by the same people or something like that, but very KOTOR like, which is obviously a mark of quality.
yeah, for sure. Yeah. I've nearly finished two, which is just it's a great game. I'm going to go on to three because I got to finish it out. I've heard things as well. And it's always sad when you have a great franchise that they tank. I mean, I'm still upset about Dragon Age, but that's for another time. All right,
Yeah.
but for now, let's go ahead and wrap for now. Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Jeremy, for joining us, and I'm sure that we will talk again.
Yeah, thanks for having me
Yeah.
on again.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for listening or watching that if you're over on YouTube. I hope that you enjoyed that conversation. I know that I certainly did, and I look forward to what is on the road ahead. And so after this, we have a couple episodes that are already recorded on Zelda, one group conversation, one interview conversation, and so that's going to be, if it's not already, it's going to be on Patreon very soon. And so if you want to access that sooner rather than later, go to patreon.com/mythicmind. Get access to all episodes of all these podcasts delivered into one feed, early and ad free. And so we got a couple episodes on Zelda, and after that, we're going to do a series on Mass Effect, as I mentioned in the conversation. And so that's what's coming out ahead of us on this show. And the good news is that because we have a decent stockpile of episodes right now, we are going to go back to back with weekly episodes, at least for the next few. Now, if you want to see that continue, then I'm really going to need your support to keep up that schedule. So go to patreon.com/mythicmind. But that's it for now. And until next time, Godspeed. The Elder Scrolls in Philosophy, a 6-week course beginning in September 2025. I don't play many video games these days, but there are certain titles that have stuck with me, enchanting the mind of my youth and never entirely fading away. One of the chiefs among these titles is the Elder Scrolls, namely Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim. The level of artistry, mythology, and lore of this universe is vast, and provides a strong representative for asking the question as to how video games might relate to literature as an art form. Where might it rise to such a level? Where must it fall short? And what unique advantages does it possess? For this 8-week study, we'll be seeking to answer these questions while analyzing various elements of this franchise, specifically focusing on content related to Morrowind, Oblivion, and Skyrim. We'll be taking a look at the philosophy of RPGs and considering the philosophical implications of character creation and formation in an open-ended series such as this. And we'll be looking at the relationship between in-game, religion, lore, and ideas with our primary world, philosophical, and religious concepts. Each week will include 1 to 2 videos addressing these topics, ongoing Discord conversations, and live meetings. You are also encouraged to spend at least a little time playing one of these titles each week as a launching pad for conversation. Join us in Tamriel that we might better understand our primary life here on Mundus. Enroll today by going to patreon.com/mythicmind and checking out the shop. Or you can access all courses that begin during your subscription period if you purchase a Tier 3 annual subscription. Get that Tier 3 annual subscription and I'll give you that special code for your all-access pass. I hope to see you there.